All right, guys, if you are watching this, you have made it to week 6. We are almost there, only 2 weeks to go after this one. This particular video is all about Lecture Test 6, and Lecture Test 6 is going to be all about the muscular system. Okay, so it's going to be a lot like the last unit. We only have one chapter that we're covering. We are going to split it into 2 parts in terms of notes. And your test over the muscular system is going to be Monday, May 4th. That is the final day that you can take it. Remember, you can always take it earlier than that. It's open for 5 days. And then all of your homework assignments are due by midnight on the 4th as well. So I just want to kind of clarify, we jumped from chapter 9 to chapter 12 because in order to understand a muscle contraction, we really kind of need to understand that whole action potential and parts of a neuron and what happens at the synapse, because we're going to see that again in our essay this time. And so that's why we're going back to chapter 10. So we skipped over it momentarily so that we could kind of get an idea about how the nervous system works. And now we're going back to cover our muscles. Now, chapter 11, you're not going to see it anywhere in lecture because chapter 11 is pretty much naming the muscles, and that's what you do in the lab class. So our test is only going to be over chapter 10. And so, once again, May 4th is going to be the due date for both your test and your assignments. As always, I want to take a minute and kind of go over your things to know, because this is essentially your guideline for what do you need to know for the test. And so we've got 10 objectives total that we need to know. Muscles Part 1 is going to cover objectives 1 through 4. I will admit it's pretty technical. It's going to have lots of new vocabulary words. It's going to have some very specific structural details that we need to be familiar with, because at the very end of Part 1, we are covering a muscle contraction, and we can't fully understand how a muscle contracts if we don't know the parts of the muscle and how they work. Objective 1 is pretty much an overview of things that we've already covered, but 2, 3, and 4 are going to be technical with lots of new vocabulary for you. Now, objectives 5 through 10 are going to be in Muscles Part 2, and this one's actually going to feel a little bit familiar to you because just like in Chapter 12 when we looked at action potential graphs and we looked at kind of depolarization and repolarization, we kind of saw this spike in our graph. We're going to see a graph for muscle contraction as well. The big difference between the two is that one is an electrical event and one is a mechanical event. So we're still going to see a change over time. We're still going to see a spike, but where the action potential had a spike in voltage, your muscle contraction is going to have a spike in tension. And so it's just a different variable on your y-axis. But it's going to feel a little bit familiar because there is some overlap between an action potential and stimuli and muscle contraction and stimuli. We have word bits as always. A couple that you're going to see quite a bit in this unit is sarco. You can see that sarco means flesh, but pretty much when you see sarco, you can associate it with muscles, because you're going to see a sarcolemma, you're going to see sarcoplasm, you're going to see a sarcomere, and then myo is also a prefix that you will commonly find with muscle because it means muscle, okay? And then some of these we've seen before and others, and it's just kind of a little repeat. Now I do want to draw your attention down here to the essay. You can see that there's only one, so it's going to be worth 10 points. And just like the essay that you had in Chapter 12, this one is going to be pretty technical. It has a series of steps, and this is really why we needed to understand action potentials, is kind of what's going on in this essay here. So I wanted to show you in the PowerPoint exactly where you can find the information that you need for this particular essay. So we are in Muscles Part 1. This is the first PowerPoint, and starting on slide 34, this is where we get into the specific events that occur in a muscle contraction. Now, essentially what we're starting with is the neuromuscular junction, and that's just a fancy name for the synapse. So we're going to have a motor neuron that is going to be working just like what we learned in Chapter 12, and it's going to be communicating with an effector or a skeletal muscle. So our postsynaptic cell here is going to be a muscle cell. So the neuromuscular junction is just a fancy name for the space between a neuron and a muscle cell. Okay, and so what you're going to need to do for this essay is kind of write it out step by step, just like what you did in Chapter 12. Hopefully you guys did a good job with that one. And you have 2 slides that contain the steps that you need to get full credit on this essay. And so slide 34 is the one that covers the excitation phase. So first, we have to get the muscle excited before it can contract. And so this is going to overlap a lot with what we did in chapter 12. So you can see that the action potential reaches the synapse, or the neuromuscular junction. It's going to release a neurotransmitter. In this case, it's a specific neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. That neurotransmitter is going to diffuse across. It's going to bind to proteins on the muscle cell membrane, or the sarcolemma. And these proteins that the acetylcholine is binding to are going to be some of those ligand-gated ion channels. And so what's going to happen is when the acetylcholine binds, it triggers the opening of those ligand-gated ion channels, and we're going to have positive ions, or sodium, rushing in, and that depolarizes or excites the muscle fiber. And then that action potential is going to spread down the muscle cell. Now the second part is slide 36, and this is where you're going to see the contraction phase. And this is why we need to understand objectives 2, 3, and 4. If we don't understand the structure of a muscle, both whole and cellular, it's going to be very difficult to understand what's going on here. You have to know about troponin and tropomyosin. You have to know about actin and myosin. You have to understand that the sarcoplasmic reticulum stores calcium. And so these are going to be things that you need to understand from part 1, objectives 2 through 4, before we get here. Okay, so this is objective 4. So it's not going to make a lot of sense to you right now, but once you've done the notes, this should make a little more sense. Now, I'll just try to give you a quick recap, and these are the kind of things that you could include in your essay, but once your muscle cell gets excited, the action potential travels along that muscle cell membrane, which is called a sarcolemma. It travels down these structures called T-tubules, and what that does is it triggers the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is a specialized ER, to release calcium. Now, calcium is going to bind to a protein called troponin, and when something binds to proteins, it usually causes them to change shape. Well, troponin is attached to tropomyosin, which is this long, ropey protein that covers up the binding sites on the actin molecule. And so when calcium binds to troponin, it causes it to change shape, which moves the tropomyosin, and that makes these attachment sites available on the actin molecule. So as soon as they're open and available, the myosin heads are going to attach to the actin. It forms what's called a cross bridge, and then it's going to pull. And really, this is all contraction is. It's a pulling, it's a shortening. So when the muscle shortens, okay, these actin filaments are pulled over the myosin, and it shortens the sarcomere. That shortening is your contraction. So the myosin heads attach to the actin, they pull towards the center, which is called the power stroke, and that's essentially a basic muscle contraction. So for your essay for this unit, you have 2 slides that you're pulling information from. You have the excitation slide, and then you have the contraction slide under objective 4. Okay, and then you have some other things that can help you kind of understand that, but I at least wanted to kind of go over the basics of your essay. That's where you're going to pull your preparation from. And then beyond that, it's just a matter of going through muscles part 1 and muscles part 2, learning the material, and of course everything that you need is on Moodle, and you need to take your test by the 4th. So I hope you guys are doing well. I appreciate those of you who've reached out anytime you need help, and I just want to, as always, continue to encourage you to reach out. If you have any questions or need any help, I'm here to assist you. I'm here to go over anything I can to help you do better in this class. So we only have a few homework assignments, and then you have your test that you need to take. And hopefully, if you have any questions or concerns, you'll reach out. And good luck on lecture test 6.